Elias Ward had lived alone for so many years that silence felt like a companion. On most days, only the sound of the wind passing through the dry grass or the soft breathing of horses inside the barn reminded him that life still moved on his land. He liked it that way. Some people tried to escape loneliness, but Elias chose it. He had lost too much, cared too deeply once, and after his wife's passing, he felt more comfortable speaking to the sky than to any human. His ranch sat far from town, deep in a quiet valley where nights grew cold quickly and the stars seemed close enough to touch. Elias moved through his routines with the slow steadiness of someone who had learned to survive on his own. Every evening, he checked the fences, even when he was tired or the air was freezing. He believed that if he kept the land safe and controlled, nothing unexpected could happen. It was one of the few things still in his control. That evening, the cold was sharp enough to make his breath look like smoke. He walked along the fence line with a lantern in his hand, his boots pressed into the frozen soil, making soft, cracking sounds. He had fixed a broken post earlier that morning and wanted to make sure it held. Everything looked normal. Quiet land, calm sky, familiar shadows. But then he stopped. At first, he thought his ears were playing tricks on him. A faint sound drifted through the darkness. It wasn't the call of an animal or the creaking of wood. It was soft, shaky, and full of pain. Elias frowned and listened harder, turning his head in the direction the sound traveled from. Again, he heard it, a thin, trembling cry carried by the wind. His heart tightened. People didn't cry out here. There were no neighbors for miles. No travelers wandered this far off the road. The only voices he heard in these parts were his own muttered thoughts and the sounds of nature. He raised the lantern and stepped closer to the fence, scanning the shadows. At first, he saw nothing. Just the tall grass, moving in uneven waves. But when he took a few more steps, the light reached further, pushing the darkness back. That was when he saw her. A woman stood near the fence, on the outside of his land, her body shaking uncontrollably. She covered herself with her arms, as if cold had bitten deep into her bones. Her long hair clung to her face, wet with tears. She looked lost, terrified, and completely exhausted. She wasn't dressed, only exposed to the harsh night air, but she kept her arms wrapped tightly around herself. Elias froze in shock, the lantern trembling slightly in his hand. For a moment, he couldn't move. He had seen many strange things in his life, storms that tore roofs away, wild animals wandering too close, even travelers who needed help after their truck broke down. But he had never seen a woman like this alone, frightened, vulnerable, and appearing out of nowhere on a cold night. The woman's knees shook as if they might give out any second. When she raised her eyes, the fear inside them struck Elias like a blade. She wasn't dangerous. She wasn't acting wild. She looked like someone who had run from something terrible. Her lips trembled as she tried to speak, but the words barely came out. "Help, please," she whispered, her voice almost lost to the wind. Elias reacted at last. His instincts pushed aside his shock. He pulled off his heavy coat, thick wool lined with warm fur, and stepped forward slowly so he wouldn't scare her. He held the coat open for her to take, but when she didn't move, he came closer and draped it gently around her shoulders. He made sure not to touch anything he didn't need to, keeping everything respectful and safe. She clutched the coat tightly, pressing it to her chest. "You're all right now," he said softly, his voice steady but gentle. "You're safe. I'm here to help." The woman's teeth chattered too hard for her to answer. Elias knew she couldn't stay outside in this freezing air for even a few more minutes. He gestured toward his house, keeping his movements slow so she wouldn't panic. "Come inside. It's warm. You don't have to talk. Just come in where you can rest." For a moment, she hesitated, glancing back toward the dark hills as if fearing someone or something might be hiding there. Elias felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. Something had happened to her. She wasn't out here by accident. But after a long breath, she nodded weakly. Elias walked a step ahead, letting her follow at her own pace. She held the coat tightly and stumbled a little, but she kept moving. When they reached the porch, he opened the door wide, letting warm air spill out. Inside, the small living room glowed softly from the fireplace flames. The woman stepped inside cautiously, her eyes darting around the room. Elias closed the door behind her, careful not to make a loud noise. He didn't ask questions. He didn't demand explanations. She needed warmth, safety, and calm more than anything else. Without looking directly at her face so she wouldn't feel exposed, he said, "You can sit by the fire. I'll bring something warm for you to wear." R. He grabbed a clean blanket from the shelf and placed it on a nearby chair for her. Then he went to the back room and found an old but clean flannel shirt and soft pants clothes that would give her comfort and dignity. He placed them near the fire without staring or raising his voice. "Take your time," he said gently. "I'll be in the kitchen if you need anything." He stepped back, giving her privacy. After a few minutes, he heard quiet rustling, the sound of fabric, and even a soft sigh as she settled in. Elias poured warm water into a mug and added a little honey. When he returned to the living room, crossed, she had wrapped the blanket around her shoulders and changed into the warm clothes. Her eyes were red from crying, but she looked a little calmer. She sat close to the fire, hands trembling around the blanket. He offered her the mug. "Drink this. It will help." She took it carefully and whispered, "Thank you." Her voice was soft, almost scared, as if she wasn't used to kindness. Elias sat across the room, keeping distance so she wouldn't feel cornered. He wanted her to feel safe, not overwhelmed. She looked at the fire for a long moment, then at Elias, as if trying to decide whether she could trust him. She opened her mouth to speak, but only a sob came out instead. Tears fell again, and she covered her face with her hands. Elias didn't move toward her. He didn't touch her. Instead, he said softly, "You're safe here. No one will hurt you. You can rest." She tried to steady her breathing. After a few moments, she lowered her hands and whispered something so quietly, he barely heard it. "I didn't know where to go." Her voice broke. But Elias waited patiently. She pulled the blanket closer and looked toward the door, as if afraid someone might burst in at any moment. "I woke up in the hills," she whispered. "I don't remember how I got there." Elias felt a knot form in his chest. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. But he didn't push her for details. He only nodded and said, "You're safe now. No one will find you here unless you want them to." Her eyes filled with relief and fear at the same time. She wrapped the blanket tighter, holding his coat underneath it like a shield. Outside, the wind howled across the land, but inside the small ranch house, the fire glowed warm. Elias had no idea what kind of trouble had brought this woman to his fence. He didn't know her name, where she came from, or who might be searching for her. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever fear she carried, whatever danger chased her, she had escaped it long enough to reach him, and he would not let that fear find her again. The next morning came slowly, with a pale sun pushing light through the thin curtains of Elias's living room. The fire had burned down to gentle embers, and the ranch house was quiet except for the soft breathing of the woman asleep on the couch. Elias sat in the kitchen, sipping warm tea and thinking about the night before. He hadn't slept. He kept checking the windows, checking the yard, and checking that the locks were secure. Not because he feared her. He feared whatever might have been chasing her. When he finally heard movement in the living room, he stood and walked carefully to the doorway. She was waking up slowly, blinking at the soft light, as if unsure where she was. Her face was calmer than last night, but still tired, like someone who had run too far for too long. The blanket had slipped off her shoulder, and she quickly pulled it back around herself. clutching it like armor. Elias didn't walk closer. He stayed near the kitchen so she would not feel cornered. "Morning," he said gently. "There's warm food if you want some." She sat up with effort, her hands trembling slightly. For a long moment she didn't speak, only looked around the room, as if making sure everything was real. Then, she nodded silently. Elias went back to the kitchen and prepared simple food: warm bread, fried eggs, and a little honey. When he set the plate on the table and stepped aside, she approached slowly, almost shyly, as if not used to being offered anything. She sat, but didn't eat at first. Instead, her eyes followed Elias carefully, watching his movements like she was still trying to decide if he was truly safe. He kept his distance and spoke softly. "Eat slowly. You're safe here. No one will rush you." Her hands shook as she held the fork. She took a small bite, then another. The moment the warm food touched her, tears suddenly filled her eyes again. Not from fear, but from relief. She covered her mouth for a second, trying to hold herself together. Elias pretended not to notice to give her privacy. He looked out the window, pretending to focus on the horses walking near the barn. After several minutes, the woman finally whispered, My name is Mara." It was the first clear thing she had said since last night. She swallowed hard, as if trying to steady her voice. "Thank you for helping me." "You don't owe me thanks," he replied calmly. "Anyone would have helped." She shook her head. "No, not everyone." There was something in her tone, something heavy, something filled with quiet truth that came from experience. Elias didn't push her to explain. Instead, he asked a safer question. "Do you remember where you came from?" Mara stared at the table for a long moment. She held the blanket close, as if its warmth gave her strength. "I was with a group," she said slowly. "We were traveling in the hills. I thought I could trust them." Her voice trembled. Elias didn't interrupt. "But things changed," she continued. "They started giving orders, telling us who we could talk to, where we could go, who we had to follow." She paused, squeezing her hands together. "I didn't agree. I wanted to leave." Elias's jaw tightened slightly, not in anger at her, but at the idea of anyone controlling another person. "So you left?" "I tried," Mara whispered. "But someone stopped me. I don't remember everything. I woke up, alone, without anything, cold, scared. I don't even know how far I ran." She looked up, her eyes filled with a mixture of exhaustion and fear. "I just kept running. Until I saw your fence." Elias nodded slowly. He didn't need every detail to understand the truth. She had escaped something dangerous. Something that had taken more from her than just belongings or direction. "You're safe now," he said again, with firm confidence. "Whoever those people are, they won't come here." Mara looked toward the hills, her eyes darkening with worry. "But what if they're looking for me?" "They won't find you here," Elias answered. "Not unless you want to be found." She didn't respond, but her shoulders relaxed just a little. Later that morning, she helped Elias in the kitchen, trying to be useful even though her body was still weak. He didn't let her work too hard. Every time she swayed or breathed too deeply, he gently told her to sit. She finally did. After breakfast, Elias stepped outside to check the land again. He scanned the hills, the tree line, the fence. Nothing looked disturbed. No footprints or tracks. But he still didn't trust the silence. When he returned inside, he found Mara sitting near the window, watching the land carefully. She hugged her knees, wrapped tightly in the blanket. "It's so quiet here," she said softly. "It always is. Doesn't that scare you?" "No," Elias replied honestly. "Silence tells me when something doesn't belong. It helps me keep the ranch safe." Reader. Mara thought about that. Then she whispered, "Last night, I thought something terrible would find me. But instead, I found you." Elias didn't know what to say to that. so he simply nodded. Throughout the day, Mara rested, but also tried to talk a little more. She explained small pieces of her life before the group, how she grew up, how she had hoped for a peaceful future, how she had been searching for something better when she joined them. Her words were soft and careful, like someone who feared they might break if they spoke too much. She never described anything inappropriate or extreme. She spoke only of fear, control, and wanting freedom. Elias respected her boundaries and never asked for details. In the afternoon, someone unexpected came. A dusty truck parked near Elias's gate. It was the local deputy, a man in his mid-30s named Jack Brewer. He visited the ranch sometimes to check on Elias. Knowing he lived alone, Elias stepped outside before Jack could approach the house. They greeted each other politely, and Jack lowered his voice. "Elias, have you noticed anything unusual?" he asked. "Some travelers in town said they heard strange sounds or saw lights near the hills last night." Elias felt a small, sharp fear inside, but his face didn't show it. "I didn't see anything unusual," he said evenly. "It was a quiet night." Jack nodded, but didn't seem convinced. "If you hear or see anything, let me know. Some folks said a group has been camping up there, but no one knows who they are." "I'll keep an eye out," Elias said. Jack tipped his hat and drove off. Elias waited until the truck disappeared before going back inside. Mara was standing near the door, her hands shaking slightly. "Who was that?" she asked. "The local deputy," Elias replied. "He comes around sometimes." Her breath quickened. "Did he ask about me?" "No," Elias said firmly. "And I didn't mention you." Mara let out a breath she had been holding. "Thank you. I'm not ready to be found." Elias understood. She wasn't hiding from law enforcement. She was hiding from people who had controlled her life. He wasn't going to push her into anything. Later in the day, Mara asked shyly, "Can I stay here for a little while?" Elias nodded without hesitation. "You can stay as long as you need." Her shoulders dropped, relief washing over her. The sun began to set, painting the sky in soft gold. Mara helped Elias feed the horses. She moved slowly, still weak, but the peacefulness of the ranch seemed to ease her fear. She even whispered to one of the horses, gently stroking its neck. Elias watched quietly from a distance. He had lived alone for so long that seeing someone else walk across his land felt almost unreal. But there was something comforting about it too, something he hadn't felt in years. That night, as the wind settled and silence returned, Mara sat near the fire again, wrapped in the blanket. Elias sat in his usual chair, reading a book, but not really focusing on the words. Mara looked at him and whispered, "I don't know why I ended up here, but I'm glad I did." 5. Mara. 5. 5. Elias didn't smile often, but this time he did. "I'm glad you found the fence," he said quietly. Outside, the hills were dark and still. For now, no one searched the land. But in Elias's heart, he knew the quiet would not last forever. Someone would eventually notice Mara was gone. But until then, Elias would protect her. Whoever she was running from, whatever she had escaped, they would not reach her here. Not while she was under his roof. Mara woke early the next morning, before the sun even rose. She sat on the edge of the couch, holding the blanket tightly around her shoulders as she looked out the window. The world outside was still dark, but she could see the ranch slowly waking, soft shadows of horses moving, the outline of hills stretching into the horizon. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel terrified when she opened her eyes. She felt uncertain, yes, but she didn't feel trapped. She didn't feel watched. She didn't feel ordered around. Inside this small ranch house, she felt something she had almost forgotten: freedom. Elias walked into the living room quietly, carrying 2 mugs of warm tea. He noticed Mara sitting alone, her eyes distant. as if her mind was caught between the past and the present. When she heard his footsteps, she turned slightly, and he held the second mug out. "For you," he said softly. She accepted it with both hands, warming her fingers against the heat. "Thank you," she whispered. Elias sat across the room, giving her space. He never stood too close, never made sudden movements, never asked too many questions. He treated her like a person who needed calm, not pressure. After a few minutes of quiet, Mara finally spoke. "I slept better last night than I have in months." "That's good," Elias replied. "You're safe here. It's a quiet place." She nodded slowly, staring into her mug. "I'm not used to quiet anymore. I didn't realize how much noise lived inside my head until I came here." Elias didn't fully understand what she meant, but he knew she carried a heavy weight. The kind that lived deeper than fear. The kind that stayed even after someone escaped danger. As the sun rose, Elias headed outside to begin the morning chores. Mara followed him to the porch, hesitated, then stepped out into the cold morning air. The breeze hit her face gently, lifting her hair. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting herself feel something simple and natural. "Can I help?" she asked softly. Elias glanced back. "If you want to, but you don't have to." Mara nodded. "I want to. I can't just sit all day. I feel better when I move." So Elias showed her small tasks, feeding the horses, checking the water troughs, gathering eggs from the chicken coop. She watched him carefully, copying every step he made. She wasn't strong yet, but she tried. The horses, sensing her gentle hands, let her stroke their necks. She smiled at one of them. A calm, old mare, with warm brown eyes. "You're good with them," Elias said. Mara blushed slightly, not used to compliments. "Animals don't judge. They just feel." Elias nodded. He understood that better than anyone. Throughout the morning, Mara opened up more, not with dramatic stories or painful details, but with small truths that revealed who she was before she ran. She told Elias how she once loved painting landscapes, how she dreamed of traveling, how she wanted a life where she could make her own choices. She told him how she had joined the group in the hills because she believed they were peaceful people searching for a simple life. They had promised safety, community, and acceptance. "They weren't all bad," she said carefully. "Some of them were just lost, like me. But the leaders, they didn't want anyone to think for themselves." Elias listened quietly as he worked. He didn't judge her decisions or ask her why she trusted the wrong people. Instead, he said, "Anyone can be misled when they're looking for belonging." Mara's eyes softened. "You don't blame me?" "No," Elias said plainly. "Wanting a place to belong doesn't make you weak." Her throat tightened. No one had ever said that to her before. By midday, Mara seemed more at ease, walking around the ranch with less fear in her steps. She even laughed once, a small, surprised sound, when one of the horses nudged her shoulder, demanding more food. Elias looked up from his work, surprised, but pleased to hear it. However, the peace didn't last long. In the late afternoon, after Mara rested, Elias went to fix a loose board on the far side of the fence. Mara walked with him, carrying a small bag of tools he had handed her. The sky was turning pale orange, and shadows stretched across the land. As they approached the fence, Elias stopped suddenly. He crouched near the ground, examining the soil. "What is it?" Mara whispered. Elias didn't answer right away. He touched the dirt lightly, his expression tightening. "Tracks." "Oh." Mara's heart began to race. "Fresh? Maybe from the morning. Maybe from last night," he said. "They're from boots. More than one person." She felt her knees weaken. Are they from them?" Elias didn't confirm it, but his silence was enough. Mara stepped back, wrapping her arms around herself. Her eyes filled with fear she thought she had left behind. She looked toward the hills, and Elias gently touched her shoulder, not grabbing, just lightly a gesture meant only to steady her. "Don't panic," he said softly. "Whoever they are, they didn't come close to the house. And they didn't cross the fence. But they're looking," Mara whispered. "They're searching for someone." "For someone," Elias repeated. "But they won't find you here. You're safe." She tried to calm her breathing. But the memory of her old life felt suddenly too close. Elias noticed her trembling and spoke again, steady and firm. "You're not alone anymore. You don't have to face this by yourself." Those words broke something inside Mara, not in a painful way, but in a way that released the fear she had kept locked inside her chest. She nodded shakily, unable to speak. When they returned to the house, Mara sat quietly near the fire, holding a cup of warm tea Elias had prepared. Elias leaned against the table, thinking deeply. He didn't want to frighten her, but he also didn't want to ignore the danger. "Do you have anyone you trust?" he asked gently. "Anyone outside that group?" Mara thought for a moment. "I had a friend. Someone who said I could call if I ever needed help. But that was a long time ago." Elias nodded. "Sometimes people surprise you. Sometimes help comes from places you don't expect." She studied him, her eyes soft. Elias looked away, feeling strangely embarrassed. "I just did what anyone would have done." "No," Mara said quietly. "Not everyone would have helped me." He didn't argue, but her words stayed with him. Later in the evening, Elias made a decision. He stepped outside briefly, leaving Mara warm by the fire, and used his old radio to contact an old friend, a man he trusted more than the local deputy. He didn't give names. He didn't say anything specific. He just explained that something unusual was happening near his property, and he might need advice soon. When he returned inside, Mara was sitting with her hands folded on her lap, watching the door anxiously. "You're okay," Elias said. No one was there. She relaxed slightly. As night fell, the house filled with a peaceful warmth again, but the knowledge of the tracks lingered like a quiet warning. Mara sat near the fire with her knees pulled close, and Elias stayed nearby, reading but alert. After a long silence, Mara spoke softly. "Elias?" "Yes? Do you think I made a mistake coming here?" He closed his book slowly. "I think you made the smartest decision you could have made." She blinked, surprised. "Why?" "Because you ran toward safety, not away from it. That fence might have saved your life." Mara looked down, her eyes glistening. "And you chose here," Elias said. "That means something." She took a long, quiet breath. "I don't feel scared when you're near." He didn't know how to respond to that, so he simply nodded. Mara looked into the fire again. "I want to get stronger. I want to stop running." "You will," Elias said. She nodded slowly. For the first time since arriving, she felt a small spark of hope, a belief that maybe her life could be rebuilt, not destroyed. But outside, in the quiet hills, something was moving in the darkness. The search wasn't over. The world Mara escaped from was still too close, and Elias knew, deep down, that the peace surrounding his ranch was about to be tested. But he also knew one thing. He would protect her, no matter what came next. The next morning brought a strange heaviness to the ranch. Even the air felt different, as if the quiet land knew something was coming. Elias stepped out early to check the fence line again. The ground was firmer after the cold night, but he could still see old boot tracks from yesterday. He didn't like the sight of them. Inside the house, Mara stood near the window, wrapped in the blanket he had given her. She watched Elias move along the fence with slow, careful steps. There was a worry in her eyes that she didn't try to hide anymore. She no longer pretended to be brave around him. She trusted him too much to act stronger than she felt. When Elias came back inside, he brushed the cold air off his jacket and said, "There were no new tracks. It looks clear." Mara nodded, but her shoulders didn't relax fully. "They might still be close," she whispered. "People like them don't give up easily." "I know," Elias replied, "but they're not getting onto my land." Mara looked down, her fingers tugging at the blanket edge. "I don't want to bring trouble to your home." "You didn't bring trouble," Elias said firmly. "Trouble was already out there. You just showed me that something needed to be faced." Her eyes softened. She didn't argue. She couldn't, because she knew he meant it. After breakfast, Elias made a decision he had been thinking about since last night. He walked to the living room, where Mara was sitting on the couch. "I think it's time we talk to someone I trust," he said gently. "Not the local deputy. Someone experienced." Mara stiffened. "Elias, I don't want to be taken away." "You won't be," he said calmly. "I won't let that happen." She searched his face, trying to see if he was telling the truth. She found no doubt in his eyes, only calm determination. "Who is he?" she asked. "Friend of mine," Elias said. "Used to work in law enforcement. He's honest. He listens. And he doesn't judge." Mara hesitated, her fear fighting against her need for safety. She wanted to believe Elias, but the memory of the group in the hills still made her heart tighten. Seeing her struggle, Elias knelt slightly, so they were eye level. "Mara, I won't let anyone send you back. But we need to know who's out there. We need help making sure they don't come again." She took a slow breath, then gave a small nod. "Okay. If you trust him, I will too." Elias stood and went outside to radio his friend again. Mara watched from the window, hugging herself, as she saw Elias talk. His expression serious. When he returned, he said softly, "He's coming. Should be here in a couple of hours." Chaos didn't arrive with loud sounds or shouting. It arrived quietly. A truck approached, but not from the direction his friend would come. When Elias stepped outside to check, his heart clenched. The truck was older, battered, covered with dust. It slowed near the gate but didn't enter. Inside the vehicle were two silhouettes. Mara saw it from the window and froze. Her breath stopped altogether. The blanket fell from her shoulders as she whispered, "It's them." Elias stepped onto the porch, his face calm but alert. He stood tall. Not aggressive, but solid, a barrier between Mara and the outside world. One of the men rolled down his window. "We're looking for someone," he said, voice too smooth. "A woman." She wandered off. "We're just trying to bring her back safe." Elias didn't move. "No one came this way." The man smiled, but his eyes were wrong, cold, calculating. "Mind if we take a look around?" "See." "Yes," Elias said simply. "I do mind." The second man leaned forward. "We're not here to cause trouble." "Then don't cause any," Elias replied. There was a long, heavy pause. The men stared at Elias, expecting him to break or soften. He didn't. Finally, the first man said, "If you see her, tell her we're worried." Elias didn't answer. The truck backed away slowly, the men giving one last look before turning around and driving off. Elias watched until the truck disappeared behind the hills. Only then did he go back inside. Mara sat on the couch, her knees pulled to her chest, her hands shaking violently. She struggled to breathe, each breath uneven and painful. "They found me," she whispered. "They're going to keep searching." Elias took a small step toward her but didn't reach out. He didn't want to overwhelm her. "Listen to me. They didn't cross the gate. They didn't come inside. They don't know you're here." "But they will," she said, her voice breaking. "They always do." "Mara," Elias said softly but firmly, "they're not taking you. Not from here." She lifted her head, tears running down her cheeks. "Why? Why are you helping me this much?" He paused. Not because he didn't know the answer, but because the truth felt heavy to say aloud. Because no one should be alone when they're scared, he said finally. And because you deserve safety. Her lips trembled. She wiped tears quickly, embarrassed. But Elias shook his head slightly. You don't have to hide your fear, he said. You're allowed to be scared. You're allowed to be human. Mara stopped wiping and let herself cry quietly. Not in loud sobs, but in soft, hurting breaths. Elias stayed near, watching over her like a silent guard. Almost an hour later, another truck approached the right one this time. Elias stepped outside as his old friend climbed out. His name was Thomas Hale, a tall man with steady eyes and a calm presence. Elias, Thomas greeted, shaking his hand firmly. You said something was wrong. A lot is wrong, Elias replied. Come inside. Inside, Mara sat tense, gripping the blanket again. Elias introduced her gently. Thomas kept his voice low, his posture open and non-threatening. I'm here to help, Thomas said. No one is taking you anywhere you don't want to go. Mara studied him for a long moment. Elias stood behind her, giving her silent support. Slowly, Mara began to speak. She didn't describe anything inappropriate or extreme. She only explained the control, the fear, the way the group had changed into something she didn't understand. Thomas listened with deep seriousness, his eyes soft with sympathy but sharp with focus. You did the right thing by running, Thomas said. And you were lucky to reach Elias. Mara nodded slowly. Thomas continued. We can take action. Quiet action. I can alert the right people. The kind who don't ignore things like this. You'll stay protected. Mara's breath shook. I don't want them to come here again. They won't, Thomas said confidently. But we need to move fast. For the rest of the day, Thomas made calls, organized discreet protection, and gathered information about the group in the hills. By evening, he confirmed that authorities were already investigating multiple complaints about them. That's why they're searching so desperately, Thomas said. People leaving weakens their control. Elias looked toward Mara, who sat wrapped in her blanket, but with a calmer expression. She's not going back, Elias said firmly. No, Thomas agreed. She's not. Thomas arranged safe lodging for Mara in a nearby town, not a shelter, but a protected residence where people could help her rebuild her life. She wouldn't be alone. She wouldn't be exposed. When it was time for her to leave, Mara stood near the porch steps, looking out over the land. The sun was setting, painting the ranch in warm orange light. Elias walked up beside her. You'll be safe there, he said softly. She nodded, but her eyes glistened. I know, but I'll miss this place. You can visit, Elias said. Anytime you want. Mara smiled softly, her first real smile since she arrived. I didn't think I'd survive the night I came here. But you saved me. Elias shook his head gently. You saved yourself. You ran. You reached the fence. I just opened a door. She looked at him with deep gratitude. Thank you. For everything. Before she walked to Thomas's truck, she stopped and turned back. Yes? This place, it gave me hope again. Elias felt something warm in his chest, something he hadn't felt in years. Come back when you're ready, he said softly. There will always be a place for you here. Mara held his gaze for a long, meaningful moment. Then she climbed into the truck. Thomas gave Elias a respectful nod before driving away. Elias stood on the porch long after the truck disappeared, listening to the wind move through the grass. The ranch felt quiet again, but not the same kind of quiet as before. It felt fuller somehow, filled with the echo of someone who had brought light back into a lonely place. He breathed deeply, looking out at the land he once believed would be the end of his life story. But now, he realized something new. His story wasn't finished, and neither was hers. And somewhere down the road, their paths would cross again, two souls who found each other in the darkest moment and learned that even in silence, hope can grow.